I call this meeting of the Legislative Audit Commission to order. It is Friday, February 16th, 2024. Today, we're going to hear the first of our 2024 evaluations. This evaluation is the Department of Human Services Licensing Division Support to Counties. And with us today from the Office of Legislative Auditor are Jody Munson Rodriguez, Deputy Legislative Auditor, and Sarah De La Cueva, the Project Manager. So Deputy Rodriguez, please proceed.
Great, thank you. For the record, my name is Jody Munson Rodriguez, and I'm the Deputy Legislative Auditor for OLA's Program Evaluation Division. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, for being with us here today to hear the results of our evaluation on DHS's Licensing Division Support to Counties. This is the first of 5 evaluations that we will be releasing in the next month or two. So keep an ear out for the rest of them coming up soon. Before we dive into the presentation, I do just want to remind the members that we have kicked off topic selection for our next round of evaluations. So you may have seen some of these floating around. If you haven't, we have a lot of extras here. So we are soliciting topics for our next round of evaluations. Please spread the word to your colleagues. If you haven't done so already, please make sure that you submit some suggestions for us. Now I'm going to go back to the evaluation at hand after my little spiel. Many Minnesotans trust family daycares, residential facilities, and other licensed providers to care for their loved ones. In Minnesota, we require that many of these providers be licensed in an effort to protect the health and the safety of the individuals in their care. DHS partners with counties in licensing many of these providers, and it's important that that partnership be strong so that both sides can effectively do their jobs and protect vulnerable Minnesotans. Our evaluation found overall that DHS's licensing division has generally provided varied strong supports to counties, but we did find room for improvement. So I'm going to turn it over to the evaluation manager, Sarah De La Cueva, to provide more details on that.
We have 4 members online. Or not. So again, online we have Representative Anderson, Representative Quam, Senator Drazkowski, and Senator Shaw. Manager De La Cueva, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I am going to share my screen first. And I'm echoing.
That's cool.
All right.
Patrick.
Thank you. My apologies for the delay. For the record, my name is Sarah De La Cueva with the Office of the Legislative Auditor, and I'm happy to be here today to discuss this evaluation with you, the Department of Human Services Licensing Division Support to Counties. Before we get started, I would like to introduce you to the other members of my team who are sitting here behind me. I have Hannah Garisu, Gretchen Becker, and Caitlin Schmaltz, and I'd like to thank them for their excellent work on this evaluation. All right. So on the whole, this is a fairly positive report. We found that the licensing division at the Department of Human Services, which I will refer to as DHS, has done a good job supporting county licensors who license human services providers on the department's behalf. There is, however, always room for improvement, particularly in how well DHS supports the licensors who work with a particular program called Community Residential Settings, or CRS. It's also notable that during fiscal year 2025, some of DHS's licensing responsibilities are going to be transferred to the new Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And before we dive into those findings in more detail, I will give you a little bit of background about the particular programs we looked at and the different licensing responsibilities, how they're divided between DHS and the counties. Explaining a bit about the structure of human services licensing is going to help explain the scope of this evaluation. The DHS licensing division oversees dozens of programs that provide services to children and vulnerable adults. There are many programs for which DHS performs all of the licensing functions. For example, mental health clinics and substance use disorder treatment programs. However, we did not evaluate these programs. We focused instead on the programs for which DHS has delegated licensing responsibilities to county governments. DHS has typically delegated responsibilities for care settings that have small capacities and that take place in the license holder's own home. I will now explain the programs we looked at. And in this chart, I'm going to show you, you'll also be able to see the units within the licensing division at DHS that support these programs, these county licensors. Family child care providers are license holders who provide daycare services to small groups of children, generally in the license holder's home. There are a few different programs related to foster care, but the ones that we focused on were child foster care, which are temporary residential care for children who cannot safely remain with their own caregivers for any number of reasons, and adult foster care, which are residential placements for older adults or adults with disabilities who require some amount of daily care. Community residential settings, which you will hear me abbreviate as CRS, are settings that serve adults with disabilities or adults who are age 65 or older. In contrast to the other programs I listed, CRS settings do not take place in the license holder's home. And some of you may be familiar with the term group homes. Community residential settings are often referred to as group homes, although group homes can encompass other things as well. And now I'll tell you a little bit about the licensing agent, the county governments that perform licensing on DHS's behalf. And we refer to these as county licensing agencies throughout our report. There are currently 77 county licensing agencies. Most counties handle their own licensing functions through a Department of Human Services or something similar. And then there are several counties that work with a multi-county cooperative to do their licensing, which is why there's fewer than 87. There are nearly 400 county licensors across the state, and they are sort of spread out through those county licensing agencies. And sometimes some agencies have a lot of licensors, dozens who focus on a particular program area, and some counties have really small offices, 1 or 2 licensors who handle all licensing responsibilities. As you might imagine, the workload for these licensors can really vary. There are some small counties that are responsible for just a dozen active licenses or fewer, and there are definitely larger counties that have several hundred at any given time. If you're interested in seeing the general number of licenses that each county is responsible for, or which counties are part of a cooperative, I would refer you to the map on page 7 of our report. Across all human services programs, there are more than 21,000 licensed providers. A version of this chart also appears on page 4 of our report. The gray bar at the top represents the sum of all of the licenses that DHS handles directly. And then the remaining blue bars are show them a number of licenses for each of the main programs that we are discussing today. So I will just highlight for you that the second largest in terms of number is community residential settings, which with about 3,700, and that's going to come up later in this presentation. And before the last thing before we move into our findings and recommendations is to explain generally how licensing functions are divided between DHS and the county licensing agencies. So the county licensing agencies accept applications and conduct inspections as part of their initial licensing process. They consider the inspection results and all the information that comes with the application, and they make a recommendation to DHS that DHS either issue a license or deny licensure. Then DHS, upon getting that recommendation, reviews the recommendation and does one of those things. Once a provider is licensed, then the counties do ongoing monitoring, which looks like regular inspections, and to the extent needed, investigations into allegations of licensing violations. DHS can also conduct investigations for particular circumstances, and it is then it is DHS's job to actually sanction providers if the counties or DHS finds a violation that is worthy of a fine, a suspension, or conditions on a license or something similar. All right, so I'm going to get started with our findings and recommendations. I've explained how the responsibilities differ from DHS and the counties. DHS has another important responsibility that is enumerated in statute, and that is to support county licensors. And that was really the crux of our evaluation. DHS supports county licensors through a number of methods. They provide trainings for new licensors and ongoing trainings for all licensors. They host a lot of optional meetings, including separate regular monthly meetings for family child care providers, or licensors, I'm sorry, for licensors, and child and foster care licensors. They also distribute a regular newsletters called Licensor Link for family child care and foster care licensors. And these share important events, tips and tricks, policy guidance, and are an important part of the written guidance that DHS provides. Finally, DHS has a triage system through which licensors can call in with questions or email with questions and about technical help within a process or clarifications on licensing standards, just to name a couple of examples, anything they need help with. All right, while we thought that DHS offered a good array of supports, we wanted to hear what the county licensors thought. So we surveyed all county licensors and received responses from 302 of them, which is 78%. Generally, the county licensors who responded to our survey expressed favorable opinions of DHS's support. For example, county licensors generally agreed that DHS provides useful support through the methods that I discussed on the previous slide, and the DHS provides clear guidance on licensing requirements across a variety of topic areas. For example, one licensor told us that they look to DHS for consultation and advice and appreciate the strong partnership that they have with the department. While responses to our survey were generally positive, we heard the most criticism of support that DHS provides related to community residential settings, or CRS. And to remind you, CRS licensors across the state monitor nearly 3,700 providers who serve older adults and adults with disabilities. We found that compared to family child care licensors and foster care licensors, DHS provides fewer supports that are targeted specifically to CRS. DHS does not provide dedicated CRS trainings. This is in part because many CRS licensors also license adult foster care, and so they've sort of been lumped into the foster care trainings. Until this January of this past year, DHS did not have monthly meetings with content specific to the CRS licensors, and there's no regularly distributed CRS specific newsletter. On our survey of licensors, 40% of the licensors who reported licensing CRS said that DHS's triage was not timely, which is a much larger percentage than that of the licensors who did not license CRS. We recommend that the DHS improve the support that it provides for CRS licensors by providing resources that are CRS specific, or by clearly indicating which parts of any combined resources, trainings, meetings, or newsletters apply to CRS licensing. Some criticisms of DHS's support transcend license type. One concern that we wanted to share was that DHS has not put certain guidance in writing. As we've mentioned, DHS hosts lots of optional meetings. However, DHS does not always provide the slides to county licensors after the meeting is over, and nor have they routinely published recaps of those meetings in their newsletters or sent them out via email. Various licensors in our surveys and focus groups pointed out that these meetings are optional, but do sometimes cover new information. Some licensors, like the one quote on the slide said, and we agree, that in order to avoid inconsistency in licensing across the state, new information should, at a minimum, go out in writing from DHS. We also heard complaints from licensors about the fact that DHS does not maintain an archive of its licensor link newsletters, which makes it difficult for the licensors to access the information months later when they need it. We recommend that DHS provide written guidance in a form that is easily accessible to all county licensors. It's important that all county licensors have consistent and timely information, and that the information is stored in such a way that they can find it when it is they actually need it. I will now shift gears and discuss the partnership between DHS and county licensing agencies and their staff. In our survey of county licensors, we asked questions about the DHS county partnership. Of the licensors who responded to our survey, 2/3 characterized the county partnership with DHS as strong or very strong. 3/4 said that the DHS is responsive to licensor concerns. And almost 3/4 said that DHS provides clear guidance on the division of licensing responsibilities. We also surveyed DHS staff from the 3 units that support licensors, and their responses to these questions were very similar, if not a little bit more favorable. While most county licensors throughout the thought licensing rules were clear, many of the licensors who disagreed commented on the issuance of licensing actions as an area where there can be confusion. Licensing actions are sanctions for providers who violate licensing rules or who endanger the health, safety, or rights of the people that they serve. When I talk about licensing actions, I mean fines, conditions that can be placed on a license to continue operating, suspended licenses, and revoked licenses. County licensing agencies can issue correction orders for certain violations they observe. However, when a violation is sufficiently serious or frequent, then county licensors must recommend a licensing action to the Department of Human Services. DHS is the only one who could take the actions against these providers. It does so once it has reviewed the county's recommendation and conducted any investigations that it needs to on its own. There are no statutory guidelines for how quickly DHS must process most types of licensing recommendations that it receives from county licensing agencies. DHS has set its own timelines, which vary by unit. The Family Child Care Unit is supposed to process county recommendations for licensing actions within 45 business days, which for comparison's sake, I'll note is almost 60 calendar days. And the Foster Care Unit has a timeline that is twice as long. That unit is supposed to process its recommendations from counties within 120 calendar days.
Ms. Delacroix?
Yes.
Just to interrupt on that point. So the clock starts when DHS receives the complaint, not when the county determines that there is a problem?
That is, Mr. Chair, that is correct. My understanding is that the county has a timeline by which it must finish its investigation. I don't remember what that is, but then once they submit a recommendation to DHS, the 45 business day or 120-day calendar would start for DHS.
And would the county timeline vary between counties?
I am not 100% sure on that, but I bet the DHS can answer when they address your questions.
And I do want to note that Senator Dibble has joined us. Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving on, we analyzed data on licensing actions recommended by counties from fiscal years 2019 to fiscal year 2023 and found that the data showed that DHS has sometimes been slow to address county recommendations. During the 5 years we looked at, Family Child Care Unit processed 3/4 of its recommendations within its recommended timeframe of 45 business days. The Foster Care Unit processed 58% of recommendations within its recommended timeframe of 120 days, but that means that the remaining 42% took longer than 4 months for DHS to address. DHS took longer than 6 months to act on about 13% of all of the recommendations during that time period. These delays have the potential to impact the relationship between DHS and the county licensors. We heard that some county licensors felt like they were stuck in the middle between the providers and DHS. And of course, the delays also have an impact on the providers and the people that they serve. A provider who, who is not meeting licensing standards remains open, giving substandard care for months while DHS is doing their investigation. And in the event that, on the flip side, in the event that someone has been temporarily suspended due to an unfounded allegation, and that takes months to resolve, then that business is closed and the people who depend on it for care are out of luck. We recommend that DHS establish timeframes that are consistent across the units and that they ensure that the units process all recommendations within those timeframes. Over the past several years, county delegated licensing has undergone some significant changes. I'm going to list them just quickly today, but if you would like more details, you can look at pages 33 through 36 of our report. DHS has implemented a new electronic checklist for certain licensors to use during their inspections. DHS has embarked on a legislatively mandated project, which will ultimately result in the department proposing revisions to licensing standards for childcare. DHS has initiated large-scale IT upgrades to improve licensor experiences. And finally, the legislature has enacted dozens of changes to individual licensing requirements, which then, of course, affect how the county licensors need to monitor the providers. We reviewed DHS's communication with respect to these changes and found that DHS has made consistent efforts to engage and inform county licensors. They've done surveys, focus groups, have provided numerous updates and demonstrations. And on our survey, we asked about the Child Care Modernization Project, which is proposing the revised standards. And that, for that project at least, the survey recipients thought the DHS had done a pretty good job keeping them in the loop and taking their feedback. As frequent and as large as some of these changes have been in the world of county delegated licensing, there is one even bigger change on the horizon. And that is that last session, the legislature created the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. The new department will assume DHS's licensing responsibilities related to family child care and child foster care. DHS will continue to oversee the other programs with county delegated licensing, such as adult foster care and community residential settings. This means that county licensors who work with multiple license types, which, for example, many foster care licensors do all foster care, they may soon be supported by both departments as they undertake their licensing work. We recommend that DHS and the new Department of Children, Youth, and Families provide clear and consistent guidance on licensing rules. This will be especially important to support those county licensors who will need to work with both departments. And finally, we recommend that once it is up and running, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families adopt the recommendations from a report that are relevant to its activities. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Members, do you have any questions? Representative Jacob.
Chair Hansen. So after serving 10 years on the county board, generally, the DHS is one of the most frustrating departments that the counties deal with. So this is nice to see that in this particular instance that things are going quite smoothly. I noticed on pages 21, 22, and 39 of the report that there is a number of recommendations laid out by the OLA for the DHS to follow. So I guess specifically, what steps be taken to make sure that those recommendations are followed up on?
Your daily appointment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Jacob. Well, I believe that, DHS will do, or we of course encourage DHS to take these recommendations. OLA will do the follow-up to check in on these recommendations that we usually do after 1 year and sometimes 2 years afterward. I don't know that any of these recommendations lend themselves to legislation necessarily. So I believe that, certainly we will do our follow-up, and if we see that not enough action is being taken, perhaps in a year, I would encourage you to consider whether there is a way to legislate any of this.
Representative Jacob.
Yeah, so really no teeth in those recommendations, so to speak.
Mr. Chair, Representative Jacobs, I wouldn't say that they don't have teeth. I mean, we make a lot of recommendations that are for the departments to improve their processes, and we make recommendations to the legislature to clarify laws or change them when necessary. We didn't see the need to change any laws in particular, but we do believe that these are things that DHS needs to do to improve their processes, and we'll check on them in the next couple of years.
And Mr. Chair, if I may.
Deputy Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Jacob. Thank you for that question. I will note that we do have a formal process of following up both with agencies and by tracking legislation to see the extent to which agencies and the legislature are implementing our recommendations. And it's not simply we ask them to report back to us. We do ask for evidence. We check into them to ensure that when they're providing us information about them, we then are able to look at it and see whether we agree that the recommendations have been implemented. So we put out very brief one-page reports a year, and then if it's necessary, 2 years after that. So we do follow up with them. We do make sure that if they're not being followed, we're bringing that to the attention, both to the commissioners and to the legislature.
Thank you.
Representative Jacob. Senator Cran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Delacueva, it was wonderful to hear that we're maybe hopefully reversing the trend of cooperation from agencies. So all I heard is positive things, that you received cooperation throughout every aspect of the review. So we all would like to see that continue, as we know it hasn't in the past. One of the delays that we talked about, or that you highlighted in the triaging, is it exclusively just to the issuance of the license or corrections or actions against the license, but not the operational contracts within the provider serving a client? Was there a distinction, or does it include all, or just literally about the license?
Mr. Chair and Senator Coran, thank you so much for the question. We did not look at the execution of contracts and how long those are taking. That was outside of the scope of our evaluation. The data that I presented are specifically about the licensing actions when there have been violations and a provider needs to be fined, have a revocation, suspension, or whatnot. Another place where we've discussed some delays potentially is with getting back to county licensors with their triage inquiries. DHS doesn't track the time that it takes for them to resolve triage inquiries. And for the most part, we heard good things about triage on the survey, but for the CRS licensors, we did have that 40% who said that the triage responses were not timely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Delacueva. And so going down that path, I don't believe, what I'm looking for is of the delays or I guess the delays or licensure issues, any details on any way to classify or grade low priority, high priority, simple versus complex in the delays? Is it, do we get the really easy things done well, but really complicated things are then further delayed and hinder our counties and providers from serving the clients? Was there any delineation between them?
Manager Delacueva.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Coran. The data that DHS was able to provide us on licensing actions did not have information about the nature of the issues. We were able to just look at strictly the numbers of cases. I do understand that, among the IT upgrades that they are doing, they will have a better capacity to sort of, to have the types of issues within a database that perhaps would lend itself to more tracking. I do not know how to answer your question as far as the severity or how they prioritize the cases that they get to first, but that is perhaps a question that DHS could answer when they get up here.
And
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Ms. Delacueva, I appreciate it. I can appreciate you giving the agency a little bit of grace, but you just said they didn't track those types of things. And to me, those, I find that unacceptable. One follow-up question, and then we'll get to others, is so you mentioned no written procedures, policies that the county's highlighted. How would a county effectively do their job, which is the intermediary to the providers, which ultimately provide the service to the clients in great need? How is a county supposed to respond effectively and consistently and timely with no written procedures?
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Fran. I'd like to clarify, it's not that DHS has no written procedures. They certainly have information that they do share with counties. The concerns that we had was around information that was sort of presented for the first time in a meeting setting that then only came out as part of that meeting. And, these are things that, I assume eventually many of them become information that is distributed in writing, but, we definitely heard complaints about that from the licensors. However, I do not mean to imply that DHS has no written information for their licensors to follow. They certainly do. And if I could just go back quickly to the previous question, Jody was kind enough to find for me that we did have on page 30 of our report a table that shows the licensing actions and their timeliness, and denials of licenses. Initial license request is on that list, and the average number of calendar days was 111 for denials of licenses.
Excellent.
Senator Quam or Senator Coran, and then we'll go to
Thank
Representative Quam.
you. Thank you, Mr. Elquaven and Mr. Chair. And so, yeah, I probably misspoke about the guidelines versus, but when we go, what they say and what they do becomes law essentially. And so even though I think it's phrased as, well, as they roll things out, we don't do anything haphazardly or random or instantaneously. And so those are the concerns I would have, that, what other agencies that you guys have audited, when they provide guidelines, which is literally an operational procedure. You can translate, you can call it whatever you want, but that from a county perspective, and certainly from a licensee, the provider on the other side, whatever they say becomes law. And if it's a guideline or anything being imposed upon them, it should always be written, well thought out, because that becomes law for them, and their livelihoods are on the line. And ultimately at the end of the day, the service we provide to the people that these programs are targeted at are severely impacted. So that's I didn't mean to misstate that no procedures are implied, but they have the same impact. Thank you for the work you've been done.
Any response? Or
Do you need a response?
we can go to Representative Quam. Representative Quam.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's nice to hear that there's a database with recommendations and progress or analysis of what the response was to recommendations. It would be nice because, 5 years, 10 years back, there maybe were similar audits, and also audits between different agencies and departments for similar things, that there was maybe access or meeting once a year to review the actual status on recommendations, and also look at related recommendations. A good example is we've had a lot of attention to some entities that performed fraud in several different programs. And in a previous meeting, I asked, and there were 2 that were identified as having had accusations or thought of doing fraud in another program, and they stopped participating. And in other words, these recommendations, as long as they're available across multiple areas, departments can learn from them, even if it's on DHS instead of MDH. So I was hopefully offline, we can look at a way that we can better communicate the status and look at cross-sharing, cross-pollination of the things we discover, just to help all departments improve, and maybe see if we in the legislature need to have some enabling language to help promote the general application of these recommendations across state government.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Quam, for the comment. I do just want to note 2 things. The first is that there is a requirement in law that MMB tracks certain recommendations at this point. And so it is not all of the recommendations, but ones that meet certain requirements do get tracked and reported to the legislature each year. So that is a great report for anybody to check out to look across agencies. The second thing I just want to note is that we at OLA are also working on putting together information on our recommendations in a more trackable way. Typically, we've been putting out kind of one-pagers on each of our reports to give you some information as kind of one-offs on each of the reports. But we are currently working on putting together more of a database that we would be able to have available for you all and hopefully publicly. So thank you for that comment.
Representative Anderson.
Thank you. Maybe this is a good time. I just want to follow up on Representative Quam's comments. Earlier this week at finance meeting, we had the new Inspector General presented for the Department of Education, and they were talking about some of the just some of the issues, right, around grants management. And he made a comment that they may need better, clearer authorizing language to actually do what they want to do with other agencies. And I think he was talking about subpoena power and so on. But we did ask him what exactly or how we could help, and he's going to try to maybe put that together. So I wanted to just bring that to everyone's attention, including the legislative auditor, but certainly you, Mr. Chair, and because what we don't want to do is handicap these people when we've sent them out to, to do a job. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention. So thank you. I have no comments about this audit. So.
That may be a good segue because our presenters from the Department of Human Services are the Inspector General and the Deputy Inspector General. So
yeah,
if they would come forward, that would be great. So the Inspector General for the Department of Human Services, Kalani Moti, and Deputy Inspector General for Licensing, Alyssa Dotson. Welcome to the commission and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the commission, for the record, my name is Kalani Moti and I serve as the Inspector General for the Minnesota Department of Human Services. And I do have a statement that I would like to share, but I'll let my colleague introduce herself for the record as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representatives, Senators. My name is Alyssa Dotson, and I am the Deputy Inspector General for the Licensing Division.
Welcome.
my charger is for this laptop.
Okay.
If our members online could maybe mute their microphone, that'd be great.
Sorry.
Thank you, everyone. I'm proud of the work by the DHS Office of Inspector General Licensing Division over the past few years to improve communications with county licensors and increase consistency in our work across Minnesota counties. We appreciate the OLA's acknowledgement of the improvements we've made and our dedication to creating and maintaining positive relationships. The report's recommendations align with improvements we would like to make to continue fostering good relationships with our county partners. We want to ensure they have the resources, guidance, and materials they need to perform their work. We are pleased that the recommendations align with our plans for improvement, which we are working to implement thanks to the investment of resources by the governor and the 2023 legislature. I do want to address one of the concerns raised around our community residential settings licensors. During the 2023 legislative session, the OIG Licensing Division was allocated funding for additional positions that will resolve critical resource shortages that have escalated for years. Simply filling these positions is likely to help address many of the concerns about support for community residential setting licensors. We have started hiring, onboarding, and training new licensing staff, a process that will continue throughout this year. But we had recognized this prior to the work that the OLA had and the recommendations that this was something that we needed to improve on. And so we had asked for the resources, which we did receive thanks to the governor and the 2023 legislature. And we are in the process of hiring and bringing that on board. And we think that that's going to make a significant difference. And we will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the
Then you could talk about this. If not, then hopefully your colleagues from DHS. I think that, with the transition to the new Department of Children, Youth and Families, I think we have a unique opportunities to take some of the recommendations, especially on page 38 of this report. And so can you talk about what have the agency been doing right now or is currently doing with the transition office, the implementation office over at MNB on incorporating some of these recommendations?
Dr. Modi?
Thank you. Yeah, we are in the midst of the transition and working very closely with the implementation office on it. The Office of Inspector General and the portions that are transitioning to the new agency aren't slated for that transition until July 1, 2025. So the beginning of that transition will be starting July 1 of this year. So we're really focused on the ones, the parts of DHS that are transitioning this July. We will be incorporating all of, let me rephrase that. We will be taking a look at all of this and seeing what things need to transition as part of the work that we'll go over from the OIG and making sure that it doesn't get missed, doesn't get lost, that we will be able to move that over. But we're still really in the planning phases of that, looking at everything and then mapping out what that transition plan will be at.
Representative Lee?
Thank you, Chair. So can you give us a timeline on, you're saying you're considering some of these, but how can you communicate that to the, to the commission and to the legislature on which of these you're going to implement for the new agency as we stand it up? I think that, like I said, this is a unique opportunity for us to incorporate these, recommendations. And if we don't take this opportunity right now at the start, I think that would be missed. And so can you just walk us through the timeline? When will you make this decision whether to incorporate this or not?
Inspector Modi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. We will be taking a look at these recommendations. I know that they had just been recently published and looking at what we need to improve. So I don't have a timeline as of yet, but we might be able to follow up with you once we've had an opportunity to look at this a little more closely and develop and see how we're going to proceed.
Thank you.
Senator Cran?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Inspector Modi, thank you for being here. And so we talked a little bit earlier about the, the lack of clarity on guidelines being issued to counties and what confusion it creates. That the guidelines, anything spoken, I come from the Department of Revenue world. Remember, in the IRS world, call the department, call for help and you'll get an answer. Call for help and 50% of the time it's gonna be wrong, and every time it'll be a different answer. But it becomes impactful to a citizen, or in this case, we're serving most vulnerable of our communities in every aspect here. And to me, I don't find I'm very intolerant of, we didn't know, or we didn't have consistent guidelines or certainly not written guidelines, but we're going to impose these criteria on licensees, right? Or the licensor, the counties, and then to the providers. And so we talk about, well, we appreciate recommendations, we'll get better. But it's been the agency's responsibility since the inception of the programs to manage these things. And so what will be done to make sure that all communication that it's all consistent, concise, legal, and understandable, not only to the county, but then to the provider at the end. Ultimately, the people, the experts are doing the job, are those providers at the end of the day. And so all of the machinations between the Department of Human Services and the County Department of Human Services, this is just licensing. We got a whole host of issues when you get to individual contracts or provider care on an individual. But what will be different? What will be done differently? We're talking about splitting out services outside of the recommendations here. What will improve that process? Or what are you taking away from this particular report that we make sure that we're not imposing policy without it first being written and then being concise and consistent across all providers?
Inspector Modi?
Thank you. I will answer at a high level, and then I will defer to my colleague here who can give you more specifics on that. I will say that we do have a lot of technology and childcare modernization projects that are underway specifically to address some of those things, concerns about making sure that there's the written guidance and the FAQs and the archival history out there so that licensors can be able to access that on it. And so I'll defer to Alyssa, who can speak more about how the specifics of those communications are going out and where they're stored.
Deputy Dotson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to clarify some of the communication that we do have written and put out there now. First, as part of this, we have, every time there is new legislation, something that might affect the providers, we work to develop implementation plans that specify, here's what the new requirement is. This is what it means for the licensors and how they implement it. And this is what means it for providers as well. If there's a component there, we publish those on our website and have an archive of those on our website as well. So any of those new requirements are written and out there for everybody to see and do that. We also host meetings. Depending on how nuanced or complicated those are, we may host meetings with licensors and or providers as well to explain what those requirements are and walk through that implementation plan with them as well. There is also quite a bit of the work that licensors do that is in statute, that is required for their job and how they license, the standards they're licensing to. We have an electronic checklist that our family childcare provider licensors use right now that goes through all of the different standards so they know what they're monitoring to. And then we are working towards building that electronic checklist to our other license types as well. They have paper checklists right now that they use for that. But that's part of our IT modernization that we are working towards developing more of those into that. And then as part of our rule modernization that we're working toward as well and kind of revising those standards, working towards creating manuals as well that will really clearly outline what the requirements are and so everybody has a clear understanding of those.
Senator Grant.
Thank you, Deputy Dotson. And so I understand we always strive to get better, but these holes consistently, every time we do these reviews, appear to be very significant. And so, you know, we'll try harder when somebody's lives in service. It just doesn't cut it. It just doesn't cut it for me. And so it's been the sole responsibility agency, and the technologies, I'm a little bit skeptical that it will actually resolve it. And so in my role in the last 7 years, I've been involved in technology agency operation performance, my now 41st, feel like a dinosaur, in and around government, providing those sole things. I agree with your dependency, or the technology will help us in so many ways. It will. But what I haven't seen is the technology side of our, we don't have a technology problem. We have a business logic problem. And within your agency, right, comprehensively, and within the technology providers, we haven't invested, the technology people haven't invested to go and learn your job and go sit down outside of focus groups. Focus groups sound great. That meets a minimum requirement, right? So we brought stakeholders in and we talked about it. Very few people can articulate exactly what they do, right? Unless they show you what they do and all of those intangible things that they do in the process of their day. And this is a complicated process. It rolls all the way out to a client, a provider, the department, the county Department of Human Services, the State Department of Human Services. It's very complicated, and nonstop change is inserted into it. I haven't seen the investment yet in the agencies and or in the IT side and or the agencies to understand those processes at an expert level, meaning your managers need to get out there and sit down and do the job at the county and then to talk to the providers. And what does it mean? Because only when you achieve that a mutually and collaborative conversation can take place about how can that technology actually benefit you. And so that's what I worry about. Yeah, we throw the money out, this sounds great, and we've got this great hope. But if we still don't have that collective expertise and knowledge, once we deploy a new technology, and I can tell you, every county has come to us in the association and said, please don't give them any more money. We can't take any more help, right? Because we got some big systems changes coming, and I know they're necessary. But what I want to see is how are we going to change that so we don't have to sit here and do these things where we actually talk about how the true technology enhances the county's ability to serve. They are your operational aspect and the closest and most accountable people in this process. Nothing's changed. Now you got money. Okay, but you haven't invested the time and it takes years to do that. So what I'd like to do is anytime we make the offer all the time, help us understand how we can help you facilitate that process of dynamic change or training within the entire operational division of DHS as it relates to all the clients they serve. That to me, then I'll go, well, we're on the right track. Right now, we just have great hope that technology is going to miraculously solve things. It will improve things, but will it improve in the quality of life and the outcomes of the people we serve, especially in these programs where it's our most vulnerable that are impacted. So that's an offer we make to I make to everybody because I have a unique role in my life that can be helpful, not just as a legislator, but that's what I want to see. And at the end of the day, I think everybody will win. And at the end of the day, we can prove we got great value outcomes and all those things will come along. I know everybody has a great desire to do it, but we don't change many times because we don't have to. And when it's people on the end of the line of our service, we got to do better. And I know we can. So I appreciate it. So I hope you take it. And I would like to see one agency at some point step up and say, we'd like to actually try to do something different. So thank you.
Representative Jacob.
Thank you, Chair Hanson. So in your presentation, you stated that you've got a one or two couple new employees coming on that will help to broaden the spectrum of what needs to be done here. So first of all, how many employees does your department employ?
Inspector.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I don't have that number. I know the central officer, like the core function of DHS, has a couple I know it's in the 2,000 range. I know with DCT, the agency is closer to 7,000, I believe, but I would have to confirm those numbers. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, and I'm not sure if any of my colleagues here would be able to get that answer for you. If not, we can get it later today.
Representative Jacob.
Yeah, I would like that number. When I was county commissioner, we always focused on the number of employees. We started with 360 when I took office. We were down to 280 when I left office. But the redundancies in the Department of Human Services, at that time, there was 8,400 employees at the state, overseeing 8,700 employees at the county level. So the redundancies and the inefficiencies of the tax dollars being spent is just, I'm looking at it and speaking from a taxpayer's perspective, and the amount of locally how these mandates from DHS onto counties end up being property tax burdens, which was never the original intent. So we need to be cognizant of how many people we employ. I understand you need the employees, but we need to look at the efficiencies as well. So thank you.
Inspector.
I have nothing further.
I think we have no other questions online. I have just a couple of quick questions. I was looking at the timeliness of licensing actions, and it said in fiscal years 2019 to 2023. And I seem to remember something big happening during that time. So I'm assuming that there's probably some variation, both pre and post COVID in terms of timeliness. Would that be correct?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know for sure off the top of my head the variation in there, but during the pandemic, the providers were still operating and licensors were still conducting visits and still conducting that monitoring health and safety there. So there may have been some variation just in how work was done during that time, but I don't know the numbers off the top of my head and how it varied.
And then earlier I'd asked during the auditor's presentation about, when does the clock start? Do we have two different clocks where you have the county inspection, and are there differences? Can a county set up their inspection timeline, and that may differ within counties, and then it gets to the DHS, and then you have the additional. So that I'm just looking at response time and how, if we're dealing with vulnerable folks, how can we shorten that, or maybe make sure that there's a timeliness there. So those are a couple questions, just variation within counties on time requirements and then add the additive time for DHS.
Thank you. The timelines vary a little bit depending on the type of allegation or concern that might have arisen. So the top priority for the timeline is anything that's going to affect the health and safety of the individuals receiving services. In statute for investigating those complaints, it varies, again, by the type of complaint. If there's a maltreatment complaint or something that has an immediate risk of health and safety, then those licensors are getting out there immediately as soon as they can. And then it tiers from there, whether they need to be out there within 3 days or within 10 days to start their investigation, to look at that. Each county may have some variety in their processes a little bit, depending on their own resources. Some counties have one licensor, some counties have multiple licensors, as depending on how many providers are there too. So they might have some variety in there, but then once those, they complete their investigation, they write a recommendation to DHS that goes to our licensing team. And that's when our clock starts, when we receive that recommendation from them for what they are recommending for a licensing sanction, whether that is a fine or a conditional license or a revocation, a denial, things like that. And we also prioritize those based on health and safety. So if there is something that comes in that there's an immediate impact on health and safety, we have concern about kids in care, that is something that we would look at within 24 hours. And that is where our triage line as well, where licensors frequently will call us and say, hey, I just sent you an email. I need you to look at it right now. There's a concern, and we will make sure that we address that. So licensors sometimes will call us and bump up in priority based on what they know in the concern as well, so that we're not, reading through a long email to get to, oh, this one is now. They'll let us know that ahead of time so that we can make sure we prioritize that too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so the review of the program, we had the first one, which is great. And again, the agency's cooperation, it hasn't been, we haven't received that across the board. So we appreciate it, because sometimes it can expose things, but if you're doing a great job, no one should worry about that. But and members, for we're trying to migrate into the multidiscipline type of program reviews and bring comprehensively and talk about in the margins. When we talk about our team did a great job, but we're not currently sourced to go deeper, because the questions we have is where we want to drive that work down. And that 40% when you didn't meet, the 25% when you didn't meet, those are the things that we're going to try and really work hard, so that when those recommendations come out, actually really comprehensive, and then material for us to respond to if legislation is needed, but also for the agencies, and to dig down and find out, to understand every facet of the value of the program and its true impact on the outcome, not just and the money we spend and all of those things. So we appreciate your cooperation and our continued desire as a board to make sure that we do great work for the state of Minnesota, and I think we're on the path. So thank you.
I want to thank the audit team and the DHS for their work, and for the counties for their participation. Just to note, as a audit commission, we do not take public testimony. We provide an opportunity for the audited entity to respond to the audit. Also, there is a booklet that is prepared, and there's usually a response from the agency as well, a written response available for folks. The committees, the legislative committees that meet during session can hear the report and take public testimony, or they could prepare legislation if they wanted to. So that is the next steps. We have several more evaluations that will be coming. I'm anticipating some of those will be released directly to committees. Some will probably come to the commission, and others will maybe a hybrid of both. So with that, we are adjourned.